Before Adam opened his eyes, before the serpent whispered to Eve, and even before the words, "Let there be light," echoed across the void, something holy had already been lost. The Garden of Adam and Eve was not the first paradise. It was a desperate, dangerous recreation. Prepare to challenge everything you thought you knew about creation, because the story of Genesis might just be a hidden history of a world that came before. The Eden we read about, with its rivers, trees, and divine commandments, may not have been the original. Ancient texts and forbidden traditions hint at a previous paradise, one so pure and radiant that even angels trembled in its presence. But something went catastrophically wrong. A profound disaster forced God to erase that world from memory, or at least from Scripture. Why would God need to create Eden more than once? What happened in that first garden that led to its complete annihilation? These are questions that have haunted mystics and theologians for generations. Clues can be found in the cryptic Book of Enoch, in obscure Jewish writings, and in overlooked verses scattered across Psalms and Ezekiel. They suggest that the very first Eden wasn't meant for humans. It was a dwelling for exalted beings who failed a sacred purpose, and that failure reshaped the entire plan of creation. Genesis begins with, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," but it never says this was the only beginning. The scriptures are strangely silent about what came just before, but that silence may be intentional. Some ancient writings speak of a realm that existed prior to time, a perfect dwelling that once surrounded the very throne of God, and when it was defiled, a new Eden had to be made, a replica, less glorious, more controlled, the one that housed Adam and Eve. Consider Ezekiel 28, where a mysterious figure is described as being in Eden, the garden of God, covered in jewels and walking among stones of fire. This being is not Adam. He is a powerful cherub, described as perfect until iniquity was found in him. Some scholars believe this passage refers to the Eden before Adam, a celestial paradise that fell with its guardian. Could this be the real first Eden? A dimension sealed off forever, erased to make way for the second? If the first Eden truly existed, its destruction wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. What could defile a place designed to reflect the glory of heaven? The answer may lie in rebellion. Not the rebellion of man, but a rebellion from within the heavens themselves. Before humanity ever drew breath, a group of celestial beings challenged divine order. And when they fell, they didn't fall to earth. They fell within Eden. That original garden was consumed from the inside out. The book of Revelation speaks of a war in heaven. But what if this war wasn't just in heaven? What if it was about Eden? A conflict over access to the divine, over proximity to the throne. Early church fathers often debated passages that hinted at pre-Adamic creation, but many of those ideas were later deemed heretical or too dangerous. Some texts were hidden, some burned, and others locked away by the very people who claimed to protect the truth. Yet, fragments survived. In the ancient text known as the Apocalypse of Abraham, there is mention of a garden above, inhabited by fiery beings who could no longer dwell in light after their transgression. In other words, they were cast out of Eden long before Adam was ever formed, and when God created the Eden of Genesis, it was not to begin, but to rebuild. Not a first creation, but a reconstruction of something that had already failed. And here comes the chilling part. The Eden given to Adam and Eve wasn't just a paradise, it was a test site. A place modeled after the original, but with limitations, boundaries, and restrictions. The tree of life, the tree of knowledge. It was as if God had designed this second garden to prevent the same mistake from happening again. A safer Eden, a replica, but with something vital missing. Something that Adam and Eve would soon notice. Adam and Eve entered a world already scarred by what had come before, but they didn't know it. To them, Eden was perfect, peaceful, designed by the very hands of God. But over time, something began to feel off. There was an invisible weight in the garden, a silence that didn't belong, as if the ground itself remembered what was buried beneath the soil, what once stood where their feet now walked. It's no coincidence that Eden is described with such careful borders. A garden planted in the east, with rivers flowing from a single source. Unlike the limitless splendor of heaven, this Eden had geographic control. It was contained, managed, protected. Why? Perhaps because God knew what had happened in the first Eden, when a being with free will rose up and defiled everything. This new garden would be different, tighter, monitored. In some mystical Jewish texts, there's mention of a Hakalot, a chamber of light once accessible to holy beings until one of them corrupted it. That chamber, according to these traditions, was shut forever, but a copy of its beauty was made on earth. That copy was Eden, not the original, but a mirror. And just like a mirror, it could reflect the light, but it couldn't hold it the same way. The serpent knew this. It didn't just know about the tree, it knew what came before. It spoke with authority, not because it was cunning, but because it remembered. It remembered the first rebellion, the first failure. It whispered to Eve not simply to tempt her, but because it saw a pattern repeating. In a way, the serpent wasn't just deceiving. It was reliving a cycle it had seen before, in the paradise that no longer exists. If Eden was a second attempt, a reflection of something lost, then Adam and Eve were walking on sacred ruins. That changes everything. Their actions weren't just disobedience. They were unknowingly stepping into a story already in motion, one that began with beings far more ancient. And perhaps that's why the punishment was so severe, because what happened in the first Eden was happening again. The moment Eve took the fruit, something shifted, not just in her, but in the garden itself. It's as if Eden recognized the pattern, as if the ground trembled under the weight of a second fall. Some traditions say that the garden began to wither that very moment, that the trees turned gray, the rivers ran bitter, and the presence of God began to fade, not because of sin alone, but because it had happened before. Even the cherubim who guarded Eden's entrance afterward may have recognized it. They stood with flaming swords, not just to keep man out, but to protect what little remained of the original glory. Because if man were to return too soon, he might find traces of what came before, and those traces could unlock questions the world wasn't ready to answer. What if Eden wasn't just a location, but a reconstruction built upon the ashes of a failed kingdom? Some ancient theologians whispered about a realm of light that was struck down long before the earth was shaped. A place where the first experiment with free will ended in cosmic disaster. That's why the new Eden had rules, boundaries, a forbidden tree. Because God wasn't just creating, he was correcting. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge weren't random. They were symbolic sentinels, echoes of choices made in the previous Eden, choices that once led to downfall, division, and exile. When God told Adam not to eat from the tree, it wasn't just a test, it was a warning with ancient weight behind it. He was drawing a line, not just for mankind, but for creation itself. In this light, Eden becomes less of a paradise and more of a recovery site, a sacred quarantine zone, a place where humanity would be tested, not in ignorance, but in the shadow of something forgotten. And this makes the story of Genesis deeper than we've ever imagined. It's not just about beginnings. It's about what came before the beginning, we were told. And maybe that's why Eden disappears from the narrative so quickly after Genesis 3. We never return. The garden vanishes from the storyline, sealed, hidden, erased. Not because it no longer existed, but because it held secrets too close to the divine. Secrets that could shatter the simple narrative we were taught. Secrets that still call out, waiting to be uncovered. Some early Gnostic texts even suggested that the God of Eden was not the same as the God of eternity. They believed that the Eden of Genesis was a replica, created by a lesser being attempting to imitate the glory of the original realm. While this view was rejected by mainstream doctrine, it raises an unsettling question. Was the Eden of Adam already compromised from the start? Even the serpent's presence feels out of place. Why would a deceiver be allowed in paradise, unless Eden wasn't fully sealed, unless it still carried open wounds from the prior fall, wounds through which old voices could still whisper? The serpent may not have broken in. It may have always been there, a remnant or echo of that first corruption that Eden tried to bury beneath its rivers and trees. In the Book of Jubilees, there's a description of Eden as being located on the mountain of God, surrounded by holy fire. But after the fall, that flame vanished. The mountain was brought low. The gates were closed. Could this be a symbolic memory of the first paradise's collapse? A collapse not caused by humanity, but by angels, beings who knew too much or desired too much? And that's why Eden still matters, not just as a story of how we began, but as a clue to what existed before us. A blueprint built atop failure. A second attempt wrapped in silence. Every tree, every boundary, every law in Eden might not have been placed for Adam's sake alone, but to keep the memory of the first Eden buried just out of reach. If the Eden we know was a reconstruction, then its design may have been layered with warnings. The rivers that flowed out of Eden weren't just for irrigation, they were boundaries, flowing away from a central source. Symbolically, this could represent the flow of truth, diluted across the world. Further from its origin, the more it spread. Perhaps only those who journey upstream, spiritually speaking, can begin to see what Eden was truly hiding. And what if the flaming sword placed at Eden's entrance wasn't just to block mankind, but to guard something deeper beneath? Many scholars ignore that the cherubim were placed specifically to guard the way to the tree of life. But in Hebrew, the phrase suggests more than a location. It implies a path, a hidden route, perhaps back to what came before Eden. A passage not meant to be opened. Not yet. Some have speculated that the Garden of Eden exists in a parallel state, veiled from human perception. That it wasn't removed but overlaid, as if placed behind a curtain. What if spiritual seekers, prophets, or even the pure in heart have at times glimpsed this Eden and confused it with heaven itself? Could what we call paradise be nothing more than a shadow of that first lost realm? And if that's true, then maybe we were never meant to return to Eden as it was. Maybe God's plan isn't to restore the replica, but to unveil the original. The one lost in flame and rebellion. The one that still holds the full presence of his glory. A paradise so intense, so untouchable, that it had to be hidden until the final restoration foretold by prophets and sealed scrolls. Throughout Scripture, there are whispers of restoration. But what if the restoration God promised isn't just about earth, but about restoring what came before Eden? The prophets speak of a new heaven and a new earth, of a glory greater than the former. Perhaps this new reality is not new at all, but the return of what was lost, the lifting of the veil over the true Eden. When Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he didn't say Eden. The word used was paradisos, the same word used in ancient Greek to describe the celestial garden of the divine. Many theologians argue that Jesus wasn't referring to the Garden of Genesis, but to a greater, eternal Eden, untouched by sin, untouched by time. Even the book of Revelation closes with images of a garden. The tree of life reappears, the river flows from the throne, and the curse is removed. But this garden is no longer on earth. It's above, at the center of God's dwelling. Could this be the true Eden, finally revealed after ages of silence, the one that was lost before Adam ever breathed? And that changes everything, because it means the story of humanity didn't begin in paradise. It began in the ruins of one. We were born in the aftermath, in the echo, and everything since has been a journey. Not back to what we lost, but forward to what was hidden before all creation. Eden was a replica, but the original still waits. The original Eden was not just a place, it was the presence. The full, unveiled glory of God dwelling without restriction among his creations. But that glory is dangerous when approached with rebellion in the heart. That's why it had to be hidden. That's why mankind was given a filtered version, one that could be experienced without destruction until we were ready to see more. Paul once wrote that, "Now we see through a glass darkly, but later we shall see face to face." That verse isn't just about understanding. It's about location, about access, about what's on the other side of the veil. The Eden of Genesis was behind one layer, but the Eden before time lies behind another, and only those who are reborn in spirit can begin to perceive it. The fall of Adam wasn't just the fall of man. It was the second fall of paradise, a second heartbreak in the story of creation. But redemption was always part of the plan. The Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, before the garden, before the fruit, before even the dust was shaped, which means God already knew that we were walking among echoes. And now, generation after generation, we carry a longing we cannot explain, a homesickness for a place we've never seen, a desire to return somewhere ancient and untouched, not the Eden of rivers and thorns, but the one burning with original light. And one day, when the scroll is unsealed and the last veil is torn, that Eden will open again. When that day comes, the cherubim will no longer block the entrance. The flaming sword will no longer guard the way, because the way will have been made, not by man, but by the blood of the one who walked through every veil, who passed through the shadows of the replica into the heart of the original, and came back bearing a key, the key to the Eden before time. Revelation says that in the end, there will be no more curse, no more separation. The river of life will flow once again, and the tree will stand at the center of it all. But this time, it won't be guarded. It won't be forbidden. It will be open to all who overcame. Not just a return to innocence, but an arrival at something even greater than Eden ever was. And maybe now we understand why the first paradise had to be hidden, why the second had to be sealed, why the story had to begin in fragments. Because God was not just telling a story. He was leading us back not to the garden of dust, but to the garden of glory. Not to a replica, but to the true Eden that never died, only waited. Outro. So if your soul has ever felt that ache, that strange pull towards something beyond this world, now you know why. You were not made for the Garden of Genesis. You were made for the garden that came before it, the one where God himself walks, and where we will walk with him again. If this message stirred something deep within you, don't let it fade. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because we are only beginning to uncover what was hidden before Genesis. And tell us in the comments, from which city or country are you watching this video? We want to know where this truth is reaching. May the original Eden, the one still sealed in glory, awaken your spirit day by day.